confused, but I think we all finally got it here. So, okay. A little bit of history, because it wasn't always like this. In fact, well, let's talk about where we met in a second here. But there's this starting point right now, as you know Singing Frogs Farm, as we know Singing Frogs Farm. I think perspective here is also important. These beds are about, they go to here, and those beds, it's field 3, it's our biggest field, and that's about 35 meters at the most. So these are only about 12 or 11 meters long, those beds.
So what
so
not to do,
as it looks.
What not to do is not to have tiny beds and very long beds and medium beds and longer beds.
I love having beds.
It's hard for all the cloths.
But yes, it's hard. So from there, again, we're just refreshing our tenets, the no-till, intensive, or ecological, regenerative, which it wasn't always that way. This is early Singing Frogs Farm when we were tillage-based, really not productive at all, and had tons of pests and weeds. And there I am out hoeing a bed of winter squash in June, and weeds everywhere, and tons of bare soil everywhere. Had our Hurleyman tractor. Anybody know a Hurleyman tractor from this side of the pond? Making our beds, right? Look at all that bare soil. And this picture is again in May, when right now we're just harvesting year round. So it's kind of an amazing difference between the days that we were tillage-based and today.
Actually, I loved a couple of times when we've been at bigger conferences where larger scale farmers who are going no-till talk about it. They talk about recreational tilling. Paul loved this because he got on the tractor and it was like, look how beautiful I made it all.
Just one more pass. It'll look so much better.
Can do so much.
So recreational tillage exists and you all need to admit it to yourselves.
To understand that our background is a little bit different. We do not have, an agricultural education, and maybe that helped us when we came into it. We weren't in this is how it needs to look. He and I met in West Africa. We were doing a program called the Peace Corps, which is from the U.S. government. Here I am working with women's groups. Paul, you're planting perennials there with agroforestry projects. Paul, in his third year, actually started a half-hectare farm as a demonstration project with all sorts of live fences and woodlots and orchards and so forth. So this was our first farm, actually.
I have to admit, I really miss the tropics. This tree was a seed about 18 months before that photograph, when it's now 3 or 4 meters, right? 3 meters. So I love the tropics. Things grow so fast. But then we moved to Singing Frogs Farm, and this is a great view of our farm, looking down the whole length of the property. It actually goes off to the left more. But this is now our field 3 over here and field 2 and all the field 4, 5, 6. All those hoop houses you see are now down here. And
we just want to give you this so that if you are looking at a piece of property that is very blank and open, you can see that there's,
potential.
There's a lot of potential there, a lot of exciting. Go ahead.
So we have a couple comparison photos. It was hard to find. I want to actually make these better in the future. But here's field 7 on the left, field 5 on the right, and what will become a hedgerow. But right now it's just some sunflowers, and that's June. This is like main season summer production time, right? And here it is today. Field 7 again on the left and field 5 on the right. And that sunflower row is now a permanent hedgerow. We've got things like field 3. One of our main fields is the long one, 120 feet long, so 35 meters or so. And weedy, kind of a mess, not very productive, lots of bare soil. But today, same field, no-till. Again, field 3 looking south in August. This is now late summer. Look at how much habitat I have for pest insects. All this weedy
and rodents.
Area. All these weeds in here that are just seeding and flowering. Flowering and seeding weedy areas are your nurseries for growing pest insects. They love annuals. That's what they thrive in. This is all your pest insects growing right there, just hopping over to your crops. There's no perennials around much. Not much. We were planting, but they were still growing. Same field, winter no-till system. No bare dirt. The pathways are covered, the beds are covered, pathways covered, beds covered. Maximum productivity, maximum photosynthetic capture. It's actually summer, but it had a nice foggy day, so it was a beautiful morning that summer.
I'll continue on. Field 6, too wide of beds, actually lots of bare soil in that area. And actually, since we have the slope going down, we used to have our beds going across because we thought, oh, of course you have to do your beds all on contour. Now this is taken maybe 5 feet from that last one. You can see how much more is growing, how we have hedgerows in there. And it's hard to see here because the flowers are so large, but we actually changed our beds by 90 degrees going up and downhill because it turned out to be better for us in the large rain events where we would get, 10 centimeters of rain.
Gentle slope, we had a natural spring of water coming out into the slope of field 4 and 6. And when heavy rain events happened, the water would be pumping out from underground into the field and raining from up top down.
There.
And so the water would back up behind those beds, and eventually it would just break through the beds and create gully erosion through the beds all the way down the field. So we turned the beds up and downhill, and then we put straw flakes in the pathways. We put a green grass road at the top of the field, a green pathway road in the middle of the field, and a green road at the bottom of the field, and we stopped erosion entirely, even though we turned the beds to go up and downhill instead of on contour. Very unusual solution, but we're not the only ones. Field 5, looking northeast in June, that's our pest habitat there, versus that same Field 5 looking northeast in June a decade later. Field 4, this is our beds on contour that we're talking about with the slope. And you can see our drip irrigation lines. It's all pretty pathetic. And then the same field now with the beds turned up and downhill as opposed to on contour. Now they're up and downhill, and we zeroed out erosion. Now our nursery area. Nurseries and greenhouses are very important for doing a lot of transplants. Since we're very transplant focused, we grow it all ourselves from seed. And this was our very, very first greenhouse. It is simply half of a pipe of 1/2-inch PVC bent and stuck in the ground, a layer of landscape fabric on the ground, and you throw your nursery flats right on it. Daytime, roll up the south side, catch all that sunlight. At night, roll it down, trap the heat in. Really simple. No electricity, no propane, obviously, just $50 and you're done. Very simple. We progressed from that to getting a second one, putting it up on pallets, on cinder blocks. George, where are you? Yeah, there you go. And then began building a third structure that we could walk into. But these are the early days when we're being scrappy, not using much money at all, and just trying things out and seeing what works. Covering the ground. Very, very simple nursery management here. And you can see so many of the perennials that we love that are getting ready to go in to create hedgerows, etc. Finally, we were able to clear ground and build our barn, and next door to the barn, we put in a metal greenhouse. This is specifically for starting seedlings in the dead of winter. So our tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers, we start inside the greenhouse in January and February. We use heat mats to germinate the seeds, but the structure itself has no heat. There's no kerosene, no propane, no electricity. What we have instead inside, I don't have a good picture right now, is 105 large barrels filled with water. These barrels are all recycled or reused barrels. They used to have food in them or coconut oil in them that was shipped across the oceans. And now they act as table legs. Each barrel has 500 pounds of water in it. There's 4 or 6 barrels under a table. It makes great table legs. And in the dead of winter, when the sun is low, the sun comes in low and hits those barrels, warming the water up during the day. And then at night, the barrels release that heat so that when it's -5 or -6 degrees outside, it's still 6 degrees inside. Which means we never ever get down to freezing in the greenhouse because of the 105 barrels. So all we need are heat mats to put the tomato, eggplant, and pepper seeds on, and in 7 days they germinate, pull them off the heat mats, and now they're just in the greenhouse going from 6 degrees to 30 degrees day and night with no active heat. of any kind.
This greenhouse up here, we actually had to heat. Oh my gosh, the amount of electricity we used on that was sort of insane. We have never heated this.
Nope, and it works beautifully. It's a 24 by 48 foot, so 7 by 14 meters. And from the back side of the greenhouse, we use the space between the greenhouse and the barn, which we call our alleyway. And the alleyway has become a nursery. Here it's the first version with a little hoop over it to throw plastic on. Today, we actually have large poles and big poles across, and so the whole alleyway nursery is walkable. And here's a good video showing our nursery overflow. So this video doesn't actually show the greenhouse. The greenhouse we didn't go into, it was July. But these are outdoor tables that are just temporary. As our nursery expands and contracts, we need some temporary tables. And so these are all different transplants ready to go out. Here's some summer squashes ready to go out, and cucumbers, and all kinds of other lettuces. We have this temporary structure. There's the greenhouse doors inside. Here's Tim, who's seeding some flats in the nursery. He's got our compost mix that we're using. And then here's the alleyway nursery now, and that's Casey doing a horrible job of watering. It's not how you water nursery flats. And then one technique that we do is once we've sown the flats, we stack them. And we stack them on the concrete in the shade of the barn for germination in the summertime. And back to the nursery in the alleyway again. So that's our nursery space. It's decently sized, but mostly we have all these folding tables we can put out and take back in. So we have temporary tables to expand and contract. The stacking the flats in the barn, this was a really smart move that we discovered about 5 years ago. The problem was, how do you germinate lettuce seeds in summer when it's continually above 25 degrees Celsius, when it's always hot out? And we found that by stacking the flats in the shade of the barn on the concrete, it kept all the flats evenly moist and also kept them much cooler. So we ended up getting that 95 to 100% germination in 4 or 5 days from our lettuces and our baby bok choys and everything else. So now we stack all of our flats, broccoli, cabbage, beets, everything gets stacked for a week before it begins germinating, and then it's unstacked and put in the nursery. The other good part of that is by stacking the flats for the first week, it takes up less space in the nursery. So now if all these transplants are in the nursery for 4 weeks, that first week they're stacked 8 or 10 high, and then they only get unstacked for 3 weeks. So it allows us to have 25% more nursery space available for our ever-expanding nursery. There's the stacked flats just waiting to be unstacked as they germinate. And you can see we use hog wire panels on some wood on top of cinder blocks. Works as a great tabletop, totally bulletproof, indestructible, for our outdoor tables. Then inside, we use the same hog wire panels on wood, but on the plastic barrels of water in the greenhouse. And a hog wire is just really thick, rigid wire. It's a 6 gauge, no, it's more than that. I don't know what the gauge is. But a really thick, rigid wire panels used for keeping pigs, amongst other things.
So a couple of things I want to add while I'm listening to this. First of all, July, when we were talking about winter farming this morning, July we have a huge nursery because these are all our late summer plants, our autumn plants, as well as the plants that are going to be overwintered. So that's why Paul's talking about the need to expand and contract the nursery and how important. That's why there's sort of some messy tables out front, is we just need to expand that area.
February through May, our nursery is massive. June, it contracts back down to a manageable size. July and August, it blows up again to being massive. And then all through August and September and October, we slowly bring it back down again.
It's tiny right now, but it's about to start getting big again as we start seeding for the early spring crops. I also wanted to say, like we're showing you some of these earlier pictures because honestly, if you're a new farmer and you're starting up, the first year, it's great to try something that's super cheap as you are learning what it is that you need, and then invest in something that really fits your needs rather than investing in something with a lot of money and then realizing, wait, that's not actually exactly what I needed. Yep. So
I want to keep going pretty quickly because we actually have the 2 big topics to cover.
We do. Okay. Sorry, I skipped over broccoli.
So for those of you who haven't been to California, this is agriculture in California. And this is what they do for vegetables, what the rest of our state does. And the motto in our state forever has been get big or get out. So if you're not that 100-acre farm and up, you aren't a farmer. And I've heard that from some of you here today, and it's just not true. We saw how the smallholder farmers are producing most of the world's food. So we are absolutely farmers. And here's a good overshot of Salinas. You can just see all the farm fields. Look at how many of those squares are not green, how much of that bare dirt is there. And what's between all the fields? Nothing. Absolutely nothing between the fields. Bare dirt. More bare dirt. More bare dirt. Ah, it's terrifying. Maximum tillage. Okay, that's not what we're doing. We are trying to design the ecology of the landscape that we want. For the context, for our outcomes, for ecosystem services, I'm going to go kind of fast. I want to get to compost and the mulch and pathway management. But we did just see this video, so I'll skip it again. Oh, bummer. But here's a good overhead showing maximum photosynthetic capture in our roadways, in our pathways, in our beds, all around, and through the hedgerows.
Except for across the fence line over here.
Yeah, where you see bare dirt, 80% bare dirt, 20% or less on the green vines, and then bare dirt, green vines, bare dirt, green vines. So, ecosystem services. These are critical. This is why you're focusing on more than just your vegetable production. And I really want to stress this. Your success is not necessarily dependent just on the vegetables. Everything else comes with it. So when I mentioned that one farm that was doing this, but they hadn't planted hedgerows yet, I see that a lot here as well, where you have a large windbreak of trees that's been there for 100 years, but there aren't all the bushes that support beneficial insects and songbirds and other life on your farm. Getting those bushes onto the farm is incredibly important for all these factors. Many of our hedgerow bushes are actually economic crops that we can harvest, whether they're elderberries or feijoa guavas or citrus. We can do all kinds of food crops in there. They're also windbreaks and soil building. We're going to cover very quickly climate regulation and climatic stabilization, because that's the one that people don't tend to think of. So obviously beneficial insects, we talked about that quite in depth. I won't go through it. But in California, we do have about 2,000 species of native bees. And about 94% of those native bees live, or hibernate rather, in the ground. Now think about tillage. And all those species of native bees that are ground nesting.
What's about the Q&A?
So I do have always liked this cartoon. We do not spray anything on our farm. No conventional sprays, no organic sprays, no sprays of any kind. Honestly, we don't even spray compost tea. Just no sprays of any kind. You never know what you're going to get. So climatic stabilization. This is a critical one that is just sort of dear to my heart. Can't even tell. Oh, yes, there's a quick little video in Field 2A. Just to give you an idea of how sort of cozy and close in your perennials can be with your annuals to really create a sense of climatic stability. So if you think about yourself, if you want to go out there and hang out in your fields and talk to a friend for a while, you probably, if it's middle of summer or middle of winter, you probably don't stand out in the very middle of your field in full exposure, sun and wind, and chat for an hour. The better place is you go over and hang out near your car, or near a fence, or near a building, or near a tree to hang out and talk with your friends for a while. Well, you can move around. You can get yourself out of the exposure of sun and wind and into the protection in the shade of a tree. Your plants can't do that. Your soil biology can't do that. They need protection from the elements just like you do. Your soil biology does not want full sun all the time, full wind all the time. It wants protection and cover from the elements as well. So going through this, we've got hedgerows throughout creating all kinds of habitat, creating all kinds of windbreaks and climatic stability. We've found that within 10 or 12 meters of just a 2-meter windbreak, within 10 or 12 meters, we will get a Celsius degree of frost protection from our hedgerows. On those really super cold mornings in the winter, it's a little warmer near the hedgerow. On the really, really hot afternoons in summer, it's a little cooler near the hedgerow. The hedgerows stabilize the temperature for all the fields in the area, especially when you have a constant maze and network of hedgerows providing all that protection for your vegetable plants and your soil biology. And it's so important to remember that it's not just the plants that need the windbreak. Your biology does too. It's not just the plants that need that overall climatic stability to mitigate temperature fluctuations. You want to keep a nice stable temperature for your plants and your biology. Such a critical factor. Oh, and the crew too. This is us, a whole bunch of us that were having to peel leeks, and we all sat down in the shade of a wet hedgerow and peeled some leeks on a hot afternoon. So it benefits everybody. I can tell you our crew loves working on the farm. Everywhere you go, you have songbirds tweeting and making sounds. It's just full of life throughout the whole farm. So here's where we are establishing some hedgerow plants. 11, 12
Actually,
years ago.
amusingly, this picture is taken at basically the exact same place as that picture.
Same hedgerow, yeah. So that's about 12 years ago, getting the hedgerow first planted when we were still tillage-based. And then here's that hedgerow a couple years later, growing on. And then here's the hedgerow more recently, about 5 years ago. They don't have to be rows. They can be triangles, circles, squares. They can be any shape or size you want. But if you have a little corner of your farm that you can't use very well, put some perennial bushes in there. If you want to divide up fields, put some perennial bushes in. They can be all kinds of currants and ribes, different fruiting berry bushes. They can be economic. But you need to create that space for your beneficial insects and for the climatic stabilization. So just getting through some of these. One critical factor for your hedgerows, this is really back to the beneficial insects. Finding species of perennials that flower at different times of the year so that there's always a food source for your pollinators. If you want pollinators to pollinate your crops, they need to be present before that pollination is needed so that they are there when you need the pollination. In order to have them there, you've got to have other food sources for them available. And if you want them to live on your farm, you've got to have food for all the months of the year that they are actively foraging.
And actually, one of the great things about perennials is evolutionarily, perennials evolved to have more flowering, maybe not so much right in the middle, even though it does show it, but sorry guys, to try and flower before and after many of the annuals are flowering. And so they're great to add for that, to keep your pollinators going. Yeah.
So this is an overview of our farm, old map, and those are all the hedgerows and compost piles on the farm way back then. But again, same idea. We have hedgerows everywhere, not just the perimeter of the farm, but everywhere. I will run this little video here. This is sort of our main road, hey birds, between fields 2 and 3. And you can see all the bed ends that we have, and you can see how we've managed soil. This is a good video for the pathway management and mulch we'll talk about in a minute. But all the different beds and maximum photosynthetic capture. If you have to use a plastic mulch, you can use a plastic mulch. Straw on the tomatoes, because they are being dry farmed. They are getting no irrigation from June 1st until they get frost killed in September. And we actually have a problem that when we video ourselves for the camera and we wear a lapel microphone, the birds are still louder than us. And the birds don't have the microphone on. It's pretty...
Actually, wait. Oh. One of the things that is actually a negative of hedgerows, because nothing in life has all positives, right? Is they bring in so much life, right? One of the things, we love the birds. You were just hearing the birds, and we will often find right next to a hedgerow, the birds love sitting up there, and they'll jump down and take a bite, and jump down and take a bite, and jump down and take a bite. So one of the things that you're seeing right here is, this is not a frost netting, it's a see-through netting that keeps the birds off of it. They won't take a bite off of the tomato plants here, but off of any lettuce or any brassica that's a new young brassica, they will. So one of the management techniques that we have to do is, especially in the springtime and early summer, but right up against it all year, have a light cover on those beds right next to it. It's still definitely worth it, and we want those birds there.
And it's something that we watch. We don't always have to cover. It's really something that we watch, and if we see the birds active, we cover it, but it's very rare. And so that was the hedgerows and the perennials, but your pathways, your roads are so critically important to have green. This is late summer. No irrigation. There's been no rainfall for 3 or 4 months on this roadway. Look how green it is through good management practices. And it's so important to have these green roads and hedgerows surrounding your fields, because that's where your beetles are, your spiders are, all kinds of other predators that are helping you do pest control. Plus, it just feels so much nicer to walk around on grassy, clovered roads. So these roads are mostly clovers I've been seeding over and over, plus some perennialized grasses that have been there, natural native grasses. And the way we manage them to keep them green for 4 or 5 months without any rainfall or irrigation is if you let them grow too tall, when you cut them, you're cutting off the growing tip, and so they die. And if you cut them too short in summer, the sunlight gets through and hits the soil and dries the soil out. Therefore, we always cut them no shorter than about 10 centimeters in summer, and we never let them get any taller than about 30 centimeters, because beyond that, they'll have the growing node grow up higher, and when you cut them, they die. We don't want dead grasses in the road. That would make bare soil by the end of summer. So it's really critical for us to maintain this sort of 10 to 30 centimeter height in our roadways so that we have constant green roadways for 6 or 7 months with no rainfall and no irrigation. Versus our neighbor, the vineyard. This is just walking out to get a soil sample in the vineyard. And yeah, I mean, you get the picture. Just dust, bare dirt. That's miserable to work in. You're sweaty, you're just coated in dust. You want to take a bath every 5 minutes walking through that. We'll skip this. So now I want to get out.
Wait, real quick. So it is 6:20, and if we go through those other two topics right now, we are not going to have time for Q&A. So what if we save those two topics for a World Cafe and just do Q&A right now? Does that sound?
Sure.
What's that? Or do you want to take one of them quickly?
I'm actually going to I had a very good compost question during the break, and I do want to cover it now so that everyone hears the answer. And the question was, many years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had an article published about us called The Drought Fighter, and that article had a lot of challenging things written in it. In fact, all my gray hair came the week after that article was published. And the challenge was the author was used to writing for high-level publications, and he wanted to create controversy. Controversy sells. And he's right. This article has gone like wildfire around the planet over and over again. And that controversy, he had soil scientists saying, you can't put that much compost on. You'll poison the water. You'll poison the water supply. That's way too much compost. It isn't sustainable. They're doing it all wrong. We had that quote in there many times over. The problem was all those soil scientists are organic certifiers, and they are organic practitioners, and their job is to teach people organic farming and doing cover crops. And they're envisioning the amount of compost we use in their system, which is a tillage-based system. And in their system with tillage, they are destroying their organic matter every time they till, and they leave soil bare to direct seed, and then they plow it under and leave it bare. So in their system, they have very low organic matter and very low soil biology. So if you put the amount of compost we use on their fields in their system, yes, you would have leachate, and you would be polluting the waterways with too much nitrogen, too much phosphate, etc., because these soil scientists were envisioning our compost use in their model. They didn't understand our model of farming. So in fact, one of those scientists in there, Dr. Ray Ward from Kearney, Nebraska, he's a Ward Labs soil scientist. I was infuriated at the author of this article for not including certain information. I said, I bet Ray Ward doesn't even realize that we're a no-till biological farm, because he's talking about our farm as if we're a chemical-based tillage farm. Please send him the article so he understands who we are, and then see what he says. So 3 days after the article came out, the article was sent back to Ray Ward, and a couple days later, Ray Ward responds and says, oh, I had no idea that Paul and Elizabeth were doing a biologically based no-till system. In fact, we're testing no-till farms up here in North Dakota and South Dakota, and we're finding a lot of the same results in our biology samples in the soil as Paul and Elizabeth are finding. So in fact, what they're doing is right on target, and it's the best we could be doing. So all of a sudden, we get completely different feedback from the soil scientists after they actually understand who we are and how we're doing it. So that was great, but there were plenty of other quotes left in the article because it created controversy, which sells the article.
And It's good that we talked about it because it's the worst thing that we would want to do is pollute our waterways and so forth. And one of the soil scientists who sort of didn't relent, who worked on those bigger Salinas, California, 1,000-acre farms, he said, you got to test your water, you got to test your water, you got to test your water. Remember earlier I was talking about how we're on the hillside and we have 2 ponds down. Well, this was a saving grace for us because we were able to test our water down there. So the year that article came out,
I would tell him, hey, I've got pond turtles in the pond. He's like, I don't care, test your water. We've got fish and crawdads in the pond. I don't care, test your water. We've got no algae blooms in the water. It's just clean. I don't care, test your water. You're polluting it. I swear you're polluting it. We tested the water.
We tested the water running on the farm. We tested rainwater, well water, water running through the farm, ponds in the middle of the property, ponds at the bottom of the property before it left the property. You know what we found? Slight amounts of nitrogen coming in from a neighbor who had a marijuana grow, a slight amount of nitrogen in the pond that we put just below our main composting operation, which we put there on purpose to catch any nutrients, but then it goes through a series of swales and all sorts of native perennial plants. The bottom of the property, undetectable.
Zero.
So that was a nitrogen.
Leaving the farm.
We also tested phosphorus. Phosphorus isn't as exciting of a story, but it was constant throughout the entire system.
Didn't change.
So what we actually found was we were not polluting the system, not polluting the water, but in fact cleaning the water through having a biological high soil organic matter system.
And those water tests were done by the author of the article before it was published, but he didn't include them because it would have gotten rid of the controversy. Oh, my gray hair. So that's our compost statement to answer a question that was asked, to really say that the system works, but you have to believe in that biology and that organic matter under your feet. And we have to take care of it, we have to feed it, we have to nourish it, and it turns around and it nourishes you and your crops and your plants. It makes them amazingly resilient, and all of a sudden, we don't worry about weeds on our farm. We don't really worry about pests on our farm. Our main challenges are really finding homes for all the food that we grow. That's our biggest challenge. And that's a great problem to have. Any questions for the last 10 minutes that we have? 15 minutes, maybe. 15 minutes. Want to go some questions? I know we had questions probably on the pathway management and mulch. But...
Oh.
We can also repeat the questions.
Okay, super.
Okay, questions.
Yeah, I have a question about compost again. I was wondering if you could tell us about your composting system, because it's something that's often a problem on small-scale farms, that there's either too little time to do it by hand, or it's too expensive to get machinery to do it. And
we sometimes do get asked, do you have a tractor on the farm? Because you're talking so much about no-till and so forth and so on. We do have a tractor on our farm, and the tractor is our compost machine. It brings compost out of the fields, it turns the compost pile, and it brings it back. So we do have a little bit of larger scale. You can see here the video. This is Paul training one of our employees who's now leaving to start his own farm on how to turn the compost. So we're just using the bucket loader. We don't have any windrows or anything like that.
So a pile, though, you can see the pile that I'm pulling from with the tractor, or that Tommy's pulling from. We usually just throw all the green matter from the fields into a big pile. And we'll have 3 or 4 piles around the farm, so you don't have to trek all the way across the farm. So I'll have a pile on each corner of the farm, and the nearest fields feed that pile. And the pile grows until it's about 3 meters by about 6 meters, and maybe 3 or 4 meters wide. At that point, no, bigger than that. At that point, when the pile is that high and that large, we consider that to be done. And at that point, the bottom of the pile has already begun decomposing, and the top is the new stuff we just fed to it. So at that point, I will tell the crew, stop feeding this pile, let's make a new pile right there next to it. And this pile that's now done, we'll turn it and take all the bottom stuff and put it on top and invert it and cover it with a compost blanket. Once it's covered, now we begin the hot composting process. This is hot compost for sure, not cold compost. And we will compost that the soil until it's ready, and that will usually take 3 or 4 or 5 turnings. And between each turning of the pile, the temperature will spike because you've added oxygen and it's combusting all the carbon, nitrogen in there. The pile temperature spikes, and then it comes back down again. When the temperature's down, you turn the pile again, and it spikes, etc. In order to have organic certification, you have to do this at least 3 or 4 times and reach a certain temperature range to ensure that you've cleaned the pile of any potential pathogens that went in there. But that's the good news, is hot compost kills pathogens, kills weed seeds, kills viruses, kills diseases. And it helps beneficial bacteria and beneficial mycorrhizal fungi that love those hot conditions to thrive in there. So what you end up with after those turnings is a finished compost product. Now, of course, we don't just take our entire pile of green waste from the fields, we also purchase compost, and we also purchase or bring in manure. We have horse manure from a neighbor who does organic feed for their horses only, and we can use that manure to mix in with the piles to have some more carbon. The purchased compost is usually from our municipal composting company, and the purchased compost is also certified for organic use. The quality can be anywhere from good to really crappy, but we'll take it because it helps to bulk up the compost that we make. And one of the questions is, how much compost do we buy in? And we buy in less than half of our compost needs. We make a little more than half of our compost needs. And here's what I want to talk about with that. Biodynamic agriculture is wonderful. And the idea of biodynamics and permaculture is a closed loop system that is sustainable. But in both of those, biodynamics and permaculture, you are homesteading. You are growing food for your family. As a farmer, your job is to export food off of your farm into your community. Therefore, your job as a farmer is to export carbon and export nitrogen into your community off of your farm. Therefore, you cannot do that sustainably anymore because you've just been losing carbon and nitrogen and water every day if you're a good farmer. So now you have to take that biodynamic principle and permaculture principle and think a little bit bigger and realize that your community is part of your farm. You export carbon and nitrogen into your community, they have leftover waste, it goes to the composter, that compost gets finished, comes back to the farm, and goes back out to the people in the community, and to the composter, and to the farm. And all of a sudden, you have that same carbon and nitrogen cycle that is closed and working for you forever. We had a soil scientist on our farm a few years back, and she was being recorded for a movie, and she had this great quote. She said, "Cities are essentially human CAFOs, human concentrated animal feeding operations. All you do is send antibiotics and energy and nutrients and create waste." Right? That's what cities are. Therefore, we need to reconsider how we view agriculture and our communities. And by doing intensive, small-scale, no-till agriculture, we can be growing food in cities, on rooftops, in backyards, in front yards, in little alleyways where there's not the ability to grow huge acreage, but you can grow food for your community, and the carbon and nitrogen cycles in your community forever in a sustainable manner that's a closed loop system, not creating waste. That's the goal.
Great. I tried to say VW bug.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think part of his question was talking about technology, and what I've been told, and I like it because I can visualize it, is for a hot compost pile, you need to start with at least the size of a VW bug in order to have the mass to get it hot enough to be able to do a hot compost. And can you do it without a tractor? You can. It takes a lot of labor, honestly.
We do use a compost blanket over our compost piles. The compost blanket is a heavy felt blanket. It helps the decomposition process speed up and be more effective, and a larger portion of the pile is decomposing at that rate. We have found only 2 places in the world that make these compost blankets. One is in Vermont, and the other is here in Germany. So we have to pay more for shipping than we do for the blanket. For you, hopefully you can get it right here. I don't know where. We work with Vermont, but another question.
Ja, ich habe nur eine ganz kurze Verständnisfrage meines schlechten Englisches zu schulden. Stimmt es, dass ihr die Tomaten 4 Monate nicht bewässert?
Is it right that you don't water the tomatoes
So we will have the tomato plants in the bed with the lettuce on the shoulders, and we will have the irrigation going during March and April and May while we have 2 lettuce crops on that tomato bed. At the end of May, that second lettuce crop is harvested. We turn off the irrigation, put straw mulch on the bed, and there's 0 water given to the tomatoes for June, July, August, September, until the frosts kill them. And we can do that because of the high biology and organic matter in our soil, and it makes those tomatoes so much more flavorful. So much more flavorful.
From the tomato side of it, if you are not constantly giving lots of water, tomato has tremendous roots that will go down several meters. And so we can both do it from our soil side and also with tomatoes. We're not doing it with, what other crops do we? Winter squash, pumpkins, we will dry farm as well, but that's it.
We accidentally dry farmed carrots one summer. We sowed carrot seeds on June, and broccoli. We sowed carrot seeds on June 20th, and we watered them until they germinated on July 4th, and then we uncovered the beds from the burlap. We watered them one last time with our hands, and then we covered them with a frost blanket to keep the carrot rust fly out, and we forgot about them. They were in their own little field on their own separate irrigation system with nothing else, and we just forgot they existed. Until September, we were giving a farm tour, and we came around and we're like, oh, there's a field here. And we go over and pull the cover off, pull out a full carrot, eat it, delicious. Delicious carrots with 0 water from germination to harvest in peak summer heat, July and August. Next question.
Hi. I can see no tillage. It's like the aim where we want to get to, but most of us are beginners. So what was your way, and how did you start to prepare to build the beds?
I was actually thinking one of the, so we have 2 different topics for the world, and I was thinking to do the mulch and pathway management and compost and a couple other things in one of them, and then the other of us take the slides and actually do how do we start beds. What do we think about that? Does that sound good? That sounds okay? I mean, just very basically, you can start via tillage. You can start via no tillage at all. So we sort of see there being 3 basic ways to get started. But let's talk about it in a group and show pictures and so forth.
And we also might, I mean, she often does for a World Cafe kind of discussion, she often talks about, CSA and labor management and business management stuff as well. So if we have enough interest for that, we can split up in 2 different groups. So, question.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe we can include it in that discussion, but one question is we heard about cut and come again cultivation, and plants are strong, and I always wonder if it's maybe a problem. You always say, okay, we only cut it through thin layer of compost and they don't appear, and I can't imagine.
So cut and come again lettuce. In my mind, it's a very good vehicle for salad dressing, but it doesn't have much flavor of its own. They're very small, young leaves. They're just beginning to grow. They're kind of like paper. At least in the US, our cut and come again lettuce is just, it's got no flavor. But a big head of lettuce has had deep roots. It's had time to establish. A lot of nutrients are pumped up in, and it has flavor. I love my lettuces. I love my salads. I don't need all the dressing on there. The lettuce tastes good, so I stick with that. But
I would also say we love our lettuces because we're able to intercrop with them. And in the springtime, almost every head of lettuce is intercropped with something else. So it is not taking up its own bed space. What's that?
Yeah. And the best part about doing head lettuce, no washing. For all of you who do cut and come again lettuce, you know how much labor it is to wash all that lettuce and dry that lettuce and package it properly to get a good shelf life. When you do head lettuces, you take your boxes out to the fields, you cut the lettuce, put it in the box, send it off to market. No washing. There's no other packaging. You just harvest in the field right to the box that it goes to market in or restaurant or wherever. So much easier to do head lettuces. For cut and come again, we've had a few crops also like bulb fennel, was mentioned this morning. Sometimes, or radicchio and chicories. Sometimes the second growth is even better than the first growth. When you actually plant the bulb fennel for a harvest, you get a wonderful harvest, but then you plant maybe a broccoli afterwards, and you have all these volunteer bulb fennels coming in for a second crop, and they do fabulously well. They have a big root structure feeding them, and they can be as good or better of a crop the second time around. So
very nicely, they shade. They give a little bit of light shade to if you have a light crop in there, and then once they start to shade too much, you take baby fennel to market.
Yeah.
So, okay, did that answer your question enough?
Part of it.
I'm actually going to add one more quick thing. Is the cut and come again? We do that in the winter time.
For lettuces.
In some of our hoop houses for lettuces. He wants to say more. He really wants to.
We missed part of your question, maybe?
So I didn't meant if you do planned or wanted come again cultivation, if you're, for example, the fennel come again, but you didn't want him to come, if that is maybe a problem yeah.
It is going to... We have had volunteers who come out to help us on the farm, and they cut the broccoli to clear the bed, and a month later, all the broccoli comes back because they were volunteers and they didn't know how to cut it properly to keep it from coming back. So yes, there is a technique on how to cut it so that it doesn't come back, and usually that means cutting right below the soil surface at an angle, just a fast cut, a jagged cut with your harvest knife, and it just leaves a really raggedy edge down under the ground that generally does not come back.
Yeah, so if this is a broccoli instead of a leek and this is the soil surface right here, we don't want to cut it like this. We want to take our harvest knife and cut it down like this. So it's both at an angle, so there's more surface area that decomposes, and then it's also under the soil a little bit. And then we have almost no regrowth, with the exception of a couple of those crops Paul mentioned, like the bulb fennel and the radicchio.
Okay, so I think I got your point. You're caring amazingly for your vegetables and all the soil and everything around it. Having worked on a farm for almost 50 hours a week since March, which is, well, probably less than many people work in agriculture, but still a lot. I'm wondering, like, what is your social impact, like, in your team? Like, what do you do to keep up social structure, motivation? How do you keep the atmosphere, like, going? Because it sounds like you're working so much and having so much on your mind, like when to plant, which plant, and whatsoever. Like, how do you manage?
Right. That's a really great question, because one thing we see a lot, especially where, maybe somebody's starting a farm, or maybe it's just a couple or a couple of partners, is we see burnout happening. Part of why we like our scale is because we do have that whole crew. There's somebody on vacation almost every single week. So we try to make sure, and that is sometimes in the height of season. So we try to make sure that people get their breaks and we just work together. Hey, Thanksgiving's coming up. You want to go visit your grandma in Colorado? You want to go there? You have your family there? Okay, we need to make sure we have so many people. Who's going to do it? And it just ends up working out. Oh, I don't usually work on Fridays, but I can work that Friday because I'm in the area. And so we'll sort of map it out. We all need to take our breaks.
Our family took a 3-week summer vacation in June from the farm. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So our employees, 40 hours a week.
Yeah, no, we really aim to have everybody work 40 hours a week. Sometimes we have like young interns and we say 40 hours and they're like, at the end of the day, they're like, really, we wanted to learn more. And then we'll take on some more hours, but the real expectation is 40 hours a week because we burned out. And I think a lot of people starting out do. So I think it's great to set up how are you going to do that. We go year round, and we have some farmers, like Joey, he's a no-till farmer in our area. He does it almost all by himself. He says, I know I could go year round, Elizabeth and Paul. I need a break. I'm going down to Mexico to the beach for 3 weeks. I need to put in cover crops and not farm in the winter. So you need to figure out what it is for yourself. Does that answer?
And the social cohesion is important. When we hire new employees, we make sure that there's a good social fit, that they really enjoy being there with each other. And we actually, the employees are having all kinds of fun beyond the farm that we don't even know about. They're really an amazing group and an amazing family. It's a good thing, right? So it's really important to have good, healthy circumstances to work in. And part of that is the ecology, again. It's a beautiful place to work. We've only ever had one employee who left our farm to go work on another organic farm after us. Nearly all of them either leave our farm to go back to school or to start their own farm or change careers. But the one left our farm, well, because she was doing farming 15 years and said, I have to make money now. So she left to do, computer programming. But our one employee who actually left to go work on another organic farm hated it. He went to the other organic farm. They were a big name. They were well known. He spent 3 days a week with a backpack sprayer on, pumping and spraying organic sprays, and then 2 days a week out there driving a tractor, plowing bare dirt. And he's looking at this 8-acre farm, and he's like, 6 acres of the 8 acres are bare dirt year-round. But we still plow it just to keep the weeds down. But it's never planted. So the level of productivity was very low, and the amount of really not fun farm work was very high. So just having a system where the employees are only doing any job for 1 or 2 hours at a time. You're never doing the same thing all day long. If you are, it's harvest, and you're always changing up your harvest to harvest lettuce, harvest cucumbers, harvest tomatoes, harvest radicchio. You're changing your harvests. So really, throughout the day, each day, you're doing many different tasks and always changing up your work, and it just keeps it fun and lively and different, and your body doesn't wear out. One last question, we're over time.
Oh, I think we're over time.
We are over time, unfortunately. So we have no more time left for questions, but we have the workshops, where we can put another input and have more conversation, and we'll be there as well after workshop. And so thank you for all of this inputs. It was a very, very long day. And so I think we need now a break. But now I have to say a big thank you. Yeah.